it seems that in Brazil, the government changes so frequently, and nevertheless is the only source from which there can be economic support for music, that if the government is favorable at a moment, then you can almost immediately give a festival of, say, modern music. And you can't plan it very far in advance because by that time the government could very well have changed. So I saw the Carvalhos about, a matter of a month ago. And when I returned recently from Colorado, there was a letter saying that they would have a festival in Rio and Sao Paulo early in September if I would come. I think they can surely have it without me. I didn't want to go because it seems to me that one of the dangers that exists may exist more and more is that once you pass the point of interesting people in what you're doing and they become interested, then what they want is not anything new from you, but rather what you have done before. So that you could be kept busy week after week, never having a chance to do anything but fulfill engagements, answer the telephone, and answer your correspondence. I remember speaking to Suzuki in Japan a few years ago about this question. He said it exists even in the field of philosophy. That philosophers who become of interest to a public are required to give so many lectures and classes and write books, answer questions and so forth, that they have no time to think.
It's almost as if one was destined to stop thinking at not perhaps in terms of our own level, but on others.
Yes.
If they step in, all right, you've thought enough. And you begin to feel, especially as one becomes famous, celebrated, you begin to feel, yes, I have thought enough.
Well, I must say that approaching as I am right now this Festival of Art and Technology in Stockholm, offhand this would appear to be, and I imagine it certainly would have appeared to me 10, 20 years ago, as a great opportunity. Not an opportunity to do something which I had already done, but an opportunity to do something that I had not yet done. Whereas I find as I get closer and closer to it, that there is a resistance in me to have a new idea for an occasion. If I have a new idea, I would like it to be somehow free of occasion, free of this well, I remember years ago, Marty, that we spoke about freedom, and you explained to me very clearly with that beautiful story about the birds, that there is no such thing as freedom. You remember that
That even the birds.
you studied the birds and you saw they were all grabbing for scraps of food.
Yes.
We do believe, though, that though there are controls in our life, as for instance with the birds that need to eat, that those controls could be in other places than they presently are.
I mean, I found recently when I was in England that you become a victim of your own, of all the stories told about you, true or false. I was in some pub and a young composer came over to me and he said to me, would you like a ginger ale, Mr. Feldman? And he heard evidently that I love ginger ale. I didn't want ginger ale. That particular, I was in England for the first time. I wanted something else. I didn't want ginger ale. And I said, yes, thank you. I didn't want to hurt his feelings. But even on a musical and the whole aesthetical area of one's life, you really, in a sense, as one goes along, you don't want to disappoint this other self, in a sense, which becomes the young composers or the public, like an extension of oneself, a peculiar extension. You acquiesce like a good parent to their ideas about you.
I had an interesting thing happen recently. I went to San Jose State College, California. Buckminster Fuller had been there for, I think, a month, not so long before I arrived. And I gave a talk in which I mentioned both him and Marshall McLuhan a good deal. And during the question period after the talk, a girl came up and said, "Now, Mr. Fuller." I was very pleased. It was very refreshing to be mistaken, you know, after you'd spent a whole evening with someone.
But you didn't correct her.
No, I was delighted.
Yes.
I laughed.
Well, that's what I mean.
And I had then this kind of freedom I was speaking of, a freedom from being known, or at least I was being just unconsciously at the moment thought to be some person other than
Oh,
who
John, I
was.
remember that marvelous. I just remember that wonderful story you told me about when you were in Holland on the radio station, remember?
I mean, where people get fixed ideas.
No. When this caretaker, as you're going into
The engineer.
The engineer,
He said,
yes.
"What's the music like?"
That's right.
And I said, "It's like Mondrian."
Yes.
And then after he heard the music, I said, "Well, what'd you think of it?" And he said, "Well, it's like Mondrian."
You almost anticipated.
But don't you consider that a fixed idea? I put something in his head, and he couldn't get it out. That was all there was in his head.
Yes. How about those that put fixed ideas in our heads?
Precisely. And what are we going to do?
I don't know. It's intimidating. I remember I had constant conversations with Stockhausen, and he would continually tell me to write big orchestral works, because he felt evidently that would be one area where I might fall on my face. See, so he insisted. So he would always say, "Well, you must write a big piece next, a big piece."
But that was somewhat Boulez's reaction to my winter music. When he looked at it, he was very impressed. And he said, "You must do something with this."
Well, I'm easily intimidated, and it did bother me. I remember I did a film score on Willem, de Kooning, and he heard about it, and he asked me how many instruments did I use. And I said 5, and he looked very unhappy. And I became unhappy. Finally, he pulled it once more about the big piece. And he asked me, "What are you writing?" I said, "I want to write a piano piece for one finger." I said,
Okay.
"But it's so difficult, I don't know how."
Yeah. I didn't hear that concert that Christian Wolff and David Berman and Kurt Schwarzig, and who was the fourth person, gave recently. You must have heard it.
Yes, I was there. I wrote a piece for Christian.
I know, and it when you mentioned one finger, and as I looked at that program of music, which I didn't hear, It struck me that that might have been that piece, was it? by any
Almost.
chance?
Almost.
What happened?
With the piece.
What happens in the piece? Yeah, it's a piece for electric guitar, isn't it?
Yes, well, what happens in the piece is, it's a fantastic instrument in terms of pitches, is because the reality of the pitches that you write doesn't manifest itself exactly like the pitches.
But I didn't get that.
Well, the strings,
Yeah.
are constituted in such a different way than
Yeah.
the other instruments that the pitch has another, goes into another domain whatsoever.
You mean it's not? I still don't get it. You mean it is pitch, of course?
Yes, it is pitch, but the pitches don't seem to be the same.
Uh huh.
But
Is there a vibrato in that instrument?
oh yes,
Or so much that I wouldn't like it?
you don't have to use it.
Uh,
You don't have to use it.
Yeah, well,
There's a
what-
gadget for it.
You turn it up or down?
Yeah.
Or what did you do with the piece?
Well, I wrote a piece for electric guitar, and I tried to overcome the fact that it was an electric guitar. And so Christian came over the house, and I had him try various things, very strange things, and strange registers. And when it didn't sound like an electric guitar, I wrote it down.
Very good.
I mean, it seemed too obvious just to write a piece for electric guitar, I
Yeah.
mean, he plays it very beautifully, very hesitant, very hesitant.
And Miss Cunningham told me it was marvelously soft,
yes,
and yet it was coming through an electric sound system. wasn't
Yes.
it? And it was still very soft.
yes, it was very difficult to do.
I know it would be. It must have been magnificent. Mm.
I have to recopy it. I gave him the only score. I wasn't sure about the piece. In fact, when they asked me for a piece for the program, I said, well, there might be a possibility of a piece for electric guitar. And that's what they wrote down in the program, the possibility of a piece for electric guitar.
But it has another title now.
No,
The
I
po-
think I have to get it back and look at it and
Oh, I see. Mm.
go over it and make not a piece out of it, but copy it out.
I think this. I know you agree with this. That one of the most useful things that could happen for the musical life now is concert that would let people experience Christian Wolf's music.
You know, John, at the same time, for whatever reason, when I was in Europe, people would speak to me about Christian Wolf, and I would tell them, well, he's a professor of Greek at Harvard, and I seem to be talking more about his background in the classics and his involvement in the classics than I did in the music, and for some reason, this is unfortunate for me, by the way. Christian is becoming a symbol for me the way maybe I feel that I really would have wanted to have been myself. I just can't understand. I'll never understand. In fact, you always talked about it. I remember reading something you once wrote about it, about writing the music and then what happens to it. I think you outlined in numerically various steps of this particular.
Did I understand you that what he is what you would have liked
To have been.
to have been?
Yeah.
Let's say then what he is. It's a very curious situation. There's an enormous amount of patience in in the music which he has written, that it is so patient that it is not being yet sufficiently heard and known.
Yes, but maybe because of that, I saw de Kooning on the weekend, and he, of course, talks about the fact, he says, I'm old hat. I'm old hat. And I pick up a piece that Christian wrote when he was 17, in 1951. There's certainly nothing old hat about it.
Mm.
And the whole continuity of the work, it's just absolutely extraordinary.
Mm.
It's not musty. You're not opening up a tomb and,
No, it'll be a magnificent concert. Mm.
But at the same time, I would look at a piece of my own that I wrote 10 or 12 years ago, and I feel it's old hat. It's been around, it's been digested by myself. It's as if it's like having a bone on a plate, and then you forgot that you were chewing on it. You go back and you chew on it again, you know. And I don't think my pieces wouldn't have been that way if they weren't performed, if they weren't out in the world, so to speak.
No, but this makes a very interesting situation, doesn't it? Bring up the question of history. And wouldn't we want the history, so to speak, to be straight? Whereas, and it is straight in the case of music that's written in 52, so forth, being known, being digested, and being perhaps a little familiar.
Familiar, last year...
There's nothing wrong with this. In fact, I think the only thing that's wrong is that things that were done then, that they are not yet familiar.
Well, it's awfully aggravating. I was with Lucas...
Or that ways have been found to just not even consider them.
Yes.
What were you going to say?
Well, I remember a year ago I had a conversation with Lucas Foss, and he turns to me and he says, "Oh, Morton," he says, "you're the safest of us all." Well, it upset me. It upset me terribly. Why am I so safe now for him?
What did he mean?
He meant that what I'm doing now is absolutely safe. He doesn't see the risk in it. He doesn't see what's new about it. You're the safest of us all, he said.
Well, that would be
But what if they never got a hold of my intersections? Or what if they never got a hold of all your work in the early 50s? That's what I mean. That history... history, in one hand, is not cruel when you see what it's done for Christian, you see, but it's very cruel when you see what it's done for me.
Well, he certainly has, you mean then, still that freedom that we have lost.
Mm-hmm.
And if I have my way, that's precisely what will happen. That his work will become known, enjoyed, used, and then
Digested,
and what will happen to it, I think, is just exactly what you speak of, and what happened so soon for Webern, too. I remember, as you must, early in the 40s, being hardly able to contain myself for the excitement that a performance of Webern's music would give me. And now I can't think of anything more unnecessary to do
Yes, I know
than
Lucas.
to listen to any piece of his.
I know Lucas on the weekend was telling me you must hear these new pieces, a premiere, he said, of these two pieces. They're wonderful pieces of Weber. I just wasn't interested.
Well, now we're getting to an interesting series of thoughts, it seems to me. We then consume art, and by consuming it, we destroy its usefulness. Do we, for instance...
Sure, and then we have Marshall McLuhan.
Do we believe... are we setting up then another belief than the one which we were taught when we went to school, which was that the more you know about something, the more you discover in it? This was the defense of the masterpiece, wasn't it?
Yes.
Now we have a situation...
That's excellent. That's quite good. Yeah.
Now we have the feeling that once we know something very well, we have, so to speak, had it.
Exactly. And by being in the world, you very soon had it with yourself.
And so we change. I think we change at different tempi. For instance, one could thinking of your work, as contrasted, say, with my work, that your work does not change, whereas mine changes perhaps too much. Actually, over these years, knowing your work, for me, it has changed enormously, and goes on changing. The piece which you just showed me an hour or so ago is fantastic. This one for 3 pianos, and it's I don't know whether the sound of it would be as astonishing as looking at the manuscript was, but looking at the manuscript is an extraordinary occasion for the imagination. It looks perfectly rational, at the same time that it's utterly irrational, and the result is that I can think of no other word than poetry, and yet it doesn't mean anything when I say that. The actual case is 3 pianos, 2 of which are, so to speak, coordinated and are working in a way that is reasonable to them, whereas the 3rd piano is working according to some totally other view. And these 2 things, which are 3, which follow no known law,
To create one.
are going to work. It's magnificent. I remember a time when your music had a great deal of soft sounds in it, but at unexpected points came those loud sounds.
Yes.
And that doesn't happen anymore in it, or hasn't happened for some time.
Not for a long time.
And that's an absolutely earth-shaking change. And
I got to love the bomb.
No, but the fact that change took place suggests that another might take place. You don't, do you really think of yourself as on the search for an image
No.
which you will find and linger with? I don't
No.
think so.
No. No, all I want, John, is to just have enough stamina to sit down and make an action. So if I'm in a search for anything, it's that stamina. I found it this week in just simply buying an air conditioner. I couldn't work all last week, and I attributed it to all psychological conditions. I became very poetic about this state of not working.
Yeah.
But I bought an air conditioner, and I started to work right away. Practical things.
Exactly. I have, though, less and less time to do that. And I'm searching now to find some way to work as I travel around.
But John, is it equally an old-fashioned idea to be alone and work?
Well, I'm sure that any idea one might get could be an idea that one could give up. I used, for instance, years and years and years ago, not be able to work until everything was in order, my desk in order. I don't know if you knew me then. And I had, in fact, to copy over neatly the sketches of the previous day in order to even be able to continue to work. But all that organization of my desk and of my manuscript and so forth was a kind of way to fool myself into working, which I then did. Then, since I moved to the country, I've gotten quite accustomed to a desk that is absolutely chaotic. And if I had an idea, I suppose I could do it. But instead, what I mentioned before, the telephone ringing, the correspondence, and having to travel here, there, and the other place, there seems to me to be no time, because I still have the notion that I should be in one place and waiting, so to speak, for something to come to me, which I would then do.
But it's usually that one place.
Home. It has always seemed to me to be home, yes.
Well, you know Stockhausen's
But now I have to get the notion that I'm at home wherever I am.
Yes, well, that's the whole thing, you see. Stockhausen told me that he's only happy when he's writing in Germany. And I used to laugh at that, being that I'm anti-German. I used to laugh at that. But I found myself telling people in Europe, I can't wait till I get back to Lexington Avenue.
To get to work again.
To get to work. And I found I tried to work over there.
We have examples of people who have been able to work while traveling and in various places. Mio is a great example of that. I have written a few pieces moving around, but they were generally pieces which I had begun at home.
I have to ask Stockhausen about that. He told me he wrote a very famous piece of his in the plane, you see, looking out. I have to ask him if he didn't begin the piece in Cologne.
But
he also had a list around where he showed me the pieces that Schoenberg wrote before he came to America, and the pieces that he wrote when he settled in America, to prove how dangerous it was to just change the locale.
But there were beautiful pieces of Schoenberg written in California, the trio, for instance.
Well, he thought his great pieces were written on the other side.
Yeah, but the trio is a great piece. Don't you think so?
Yes. I think this whole business of a place and writing at your desk in your home just fortifies this whole need for identity, really. And I think no matter who you are, there is a certain loss of this identity.
As we move around?
As we move around. Or we assume many identities.
But don't you think that if our work, now that we have agreed we would like to write at home, has any is saying anything, as they say, you know. It is saying that we are at home wherever we are, for one thing.
But it's saying that at home.
And it's also not saying static things, but is rather saying moving things. Don't you agree? I will.
Yes, I do.
Well, it's hard to say whether we're standing still or moving.
Maybe what I'm really talking about is privacy.
But who can speak of privacy now? You know, who doesn't have an answering service and who answers his telephone? Just that. What privacy do you have? It's
Well, I
as
know
though-
that when,
It's
remember
as
when I was
though you
living
were living in a hall somewhere.
when I was living on 19th Street in that building where Barney Newman lived upstairs. I remember for about a year I took the phone out. And he came in one day and he said, "Oh, may I use your phone?" I said, "Well, Barney, it's disconnected." He looked at me, and then he looked down at the phone for a long time. And he said to me, "You're a hero. How was it possible? How did you do it?" And I certainly did feel like a hero. I think it's the most heroic thing we could do.
To take the phone out.
To take the phone out.
And yet it's the most asocial.
Come to it. Is that a virtue or...
To be asocial?
We come to it. That's it.
No, but the thing is that anything that you want to do, you get a desire to do something, it's going to involve you willy-nilly in the use of the telephone. Now, at that point, when you're full of desire to accomplish something in society, and the person at the other end has either an answering service or has pulled out the phone or something like this, it presents an obstacle. It stops the fluency. And you must admit it's extremely annoying to you. You would like, at the point when your desires move out to other people, to have them answer their telephones.
Yes, but getting back to my earlier remark, getting out into the world means only one thing to me. Making a living. The people that are dear to me and who I love, I see, and I will continue and I'll manage to see.
But it can also mean, besides just making a living, it can mean furthering your work. I mean to say the conceptions and even the poetry of the work through telephone calls. If not a telephone call, a letter.
Or a cable. When you get a cable and a telegram, then you really know something's cooking. No, I think in a sense that socialness, that emphasis on that phenomena,
Yes.
in a sense, it's just a rationalization.
No, I'm actually thinking that if one were going to revise the Ten Commandments, now, to suit the present social life and even individual life, that one of them would be, thou shalt not have an answering service, and thou shalt not have an unlisted telephone number. In fact, thou shalt have a telephone and thou shalt answer it.
Yes. But at the same time, though I'm talking against all this, I remember I couldn't have been more than 13, and I started to daydream about Varese, and I thought I was doing something totally unrealistic. I'll never forget it. I picked up the phone book, and I started to, turn to the V's, knowing that his name is not going to be there. And there it was, you see.
Yes, the same thing happened to me with Richard Bullig in Los Angeles. You never knew him.
Oh, no, many people tell me, how do I reach John Cage? I said, just
pick up the telephone.
pick up the phone. What was the story about Richard Bullig?
It was the same as your story about Perez. I was in Los Angeles, and I had been reading that he was the first to play the Schoenberg Opus 11, and I wanted to meet him, and so I picked up the Los Angeles telephone book, and there he was in it. I didn't meet him as a result of calling him. He refused to see me until I actually stood in front of his house for 12 hours.
Was Schoenberg in the telephone book in Los Angeles?
He was later, but at that time, this was early in the
Yes.
30s,
Yes, but when he was there.
When he was there, he was in the telephone book, sure. It's very curious who's in and who isn't.
The telephone book.
Yeah. And I think it's it seems trivial, but I think it's at the heart of this problem of the individual in society.
Yes, but I'm sure there's only one John Cage in the telephone book, but there are quite a few Morton Feldmans in the New York book. And Varese once called me, and he says that he just called another Morton Feldman.
Mm-hmm.
And he said to him, well, are you the composer? And the man said, no. He said, I'm in lingerie. But what were you going to say about the telephone book?
I don't know. I'm just simply exploring this situation of a person living now, having work to do, which he learned to do at home. The home is open, so to speak, at both ends now. And then, as we've been agreeing, more and more one is obliged to go out, so to speak, to work, and one isn't even at home, and one isn't even there long enough to do one's work. So it seems to me that this fact of the home not being what it used to be, and as the spending of one's time being more and more not at home, that great changes must take place, not just as we have already made changes in our work, but changes must be made in the places, ways, times, etc., in which we do our work.
Yes.
And this can be expected to change our work. You remember the story about a Varese piece that had a sound in it, and then Rosenfeld, I think it was, went to visit Varese and discovered that the sound was in the environment, and that Varese, without knowing it, had put it in his music. So, as we move about and are less and less at home, this environment, which will never really be something familiar, will more and more become tourists.
Mm-hmm.
Could have an effect on the music. You were telling me as we came to the station here that you were planning to go back and forth a good deal. Now this might just result in back and forth pieces. Don't you think? Back and forth to England, or to Europe? Do you have any desire to go to Japan?
Very much.
I think they'd just be delighted to have you there. That's what people always said to me, you know. And when I got to Japan, I discovered that they didn't like me any more there than they do here. You know? Very curious, this question of death. You remember last winter, Kiesler died,
Yes.
and Varese died, and Henry
Yes.
Cowell died.
Yes.
And now, today in the paper, Suzuki died. I had such different feelings with each of those deaths. Today, with Suzuki's death, I felt as though nothing had changed. Absolutely, I suppose I have a real feeling that he's of no difference between life and death at that point. In all the other cases, I felt either loss or release or something like that. Loss of a member of the family or loss of someone irreplaceable. Maybe it was because Suzuki wasn't really well, he was a magnificent person. I was going to say that he was an introducer. He was the sort of person I've always wished critics were. He made things something you could deal with. And he could do it without even opening his mouth, just by being in the room. Did I ever tell you that marvelous story about him with the philosophers at a Congress in Hawaii? The one where they, for 3 days, discussed reality. And Suzuki never opened his mouth. And finally, at the end of the 3rd day, since he'd been invited all the way from Japan, they thought he ought to say something. The chairman said, "Oh, Dr. Suzuki, would you say something about reality?" And he still didn't say anything. So the chairman said, "Well, this table, for instance, that we're sitting at, would you say that it was real?" And Suzuki looked up and said, "Yes." And then the chairman said, "In what sense would you say it was real?" And Suzuki said, "In all senses." I'm absolutely certain, though, that Duchamp's work is of great importance in relation to those things I was saying earlier about the telephone, about changes in our way of living in the world, and as a result, changes in the circumstances under which we do our work, and finally, what it is that we do.
I was just reading today. I think it was in Alice James's diary.
Who's Alice James?
She was the sister of the James brothers.
Really?
Yes, she was quite extraordinary. And I think this was 1885. There was an entry about that they were talking about putting a telephone to France, a connection. And there was resistance against it for some reason. And one of her friends said they must be afraid that the French might say something clever into it. and Yes, well, in a sense, maybe what the telephone does when it rings. It rings. It takes us away from ourself, and I think ourself, or the whole concept of self, doesn't work. I mean, for whom the telephone rings, it rings for me, obviously, unless it's a wrong number. And it takes me out of this other dream about being an artist in some other time or some other place. Not really some other time. It's really some other place other really than the reality that I'm living now. But at the same time, when I wake, I don't have that feeling that my sounds or that the music itself, in a sense, is someplace else. It is what it is, and it's there. Maybe, in a sense, I'm more concerned the fact, like when the baby is sleeping and the phone rings, I don't want to waken it up, you see. I don't think it's my concern so much, but I think it's for myself, that is, but for the work that I'm doing, which, in a sense, is becoming much more separate from me than when I used to be. I used to feel when I was younger that I was inseparable from what I was doing, and now there is a split. There is the work and there is myself. And if I have any problem, it's to keep the work from becoming an object or a dead thing.
Oh, well, that it isn't. And it has life the more you leave it alone, don't you think? To live its own life. That's become my attitude. What you'd said about the baby, you know, and the work, and having its life, and the possibility of this interruption, waking it up or altering it. Just that could be seen not as an interruption or a threat or a danger or anything, but as something like, say, inspiration. A little fresh air coming in.
With the ringing.
With the ringing, yes.
I think that's the point, in a sense. I think it becomes clearer. I must admit that as we're talking, I didn't know exactly what
we would talk about.
What we were talking, not only what we will talk about, but what we're talking about now. But I think it's really becoming clearer for me that it's just impossible any longer to escape from these interruptions.
Right.
In fact, it almost becomes as if we ourselves then is the interruption.
Right. And we're very good at that.
And we're very good at that.
Better than the telephone.
Better, much better.
Because we can do that without ringing.
Yes, of course, it makes us seem so ridiculously pompous. For example, one is working. One thinks one is God knows where. One is thinking the most sublime thoughts. The phone rings. We forget it. How good could it have been? Anyway, you know, these whole notions of our ideas of what we would use, what we would call concentration.
Right.
You know, there's a marvelous story about somebody visiting Haydn. Ask him if he ever wrote any programmatic music, or you ever used it as an idea, an impetus to make a piece of music. And Haydn said, yes, there is this movement in the symphony, which is a dialogue between God and a sinner. But I don't remember which symphony that was.